Well, we're ready. It's happening. It's recording. Amazing. Welcome everyone to Grip's next incredible webinar with our even more incredible guest panelists. Now, this webinar is called The Ultimate Guide to Running Events That Have Facilitated Meetings. Now, of course, there are lots of ways to describe these types of meetings. So what we're talking about here are events that have meetings at the heart of them that the organizer arranges. Now, there are lots of these sorts of events coming out. We're seeing more and more and more of them. And certainly if you look at our pipeline at Grip, there are so many new customers who are fascinated about this way of running events where meetings are directly part of the main experience. So we wanted to give you the ultimate guide to how these are run. And so we decided to get some of the best minds in the whole world on how you run pre-scheduled meetings, hosted meetings, structured meeting programs. Again, there are lots of ways to describe this, but it is very exciting and they're not easy to do. So without further ado, let me move my slide on. And tell you, number one, we've got lots of questions that come from you. Here they are on a bit of paper. Exciting. You probably can't see it. It's knackering my virtual background. But there are so many questions. I've had to do it at size 4 font. And I'm 44 and I can hardly read this. So that's how good those questions are. Lots of good questions. And we have 3, as I say, amazing panelists. We've got Greg Reeves, Managing Director International at Jacobs Media. We've got Jack Newey, Portfolio Director at MASH Media. And we've got Abi Cannons, who is the one and only Senior Strategic Account Manager at Grip. I think I want strategic in my job title. That'd be great, wouldn't it? If only we could have that. I think I'm just going to go to each of you. And can you just give me a bit of a rundown of who you are and tell us about how you run Hosted Buyer, but in a sentence or two, because we're really going to get into it. But if you can do that, that would be great. So first of all, I'm going to go to Abi. Obviously, you're enabling your clients to do facilitated meetings.
That's right. So actually, I'm lucky enough to have Greg and Jack as my clients, both of whom who are doing facilitated meetings, but others as well. So so I'm speaking from the kind of client management perspective. I'm hoping to be able to add something to the conversation about how we help our clients to understand how to strategize if they're thinking about doing a facilitated meetings program or pre-scheduled meetings program, however you want to call it. You know, how we can start thinking about that and the types of decisions that they will need to make to get to the point where Greg and Jack are at now.
Great. That was about 16 sentences, but I will take 16 sentences over 2. Greg, now your challenge to try and get it in 2 sentences or less. Tell us a bit about what you're doing.
Sure. We specialize in B2B tourism events, so specifically luxury. And 80% of the events we run all over the world are pre-scheduled meetings. So I live and die by facilitated meetings, and we can go into more of that in a little bit.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And Jack, tell us a bit about your meetings.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm probably the opposite of Greg here in terms of what I run is International Conflicts. So I'm sure probably a lot of people have heard of that show, which is the largest show for the event sector, which is not hosted by a facilitated meeting show in any way. There are meetings involved through Grip, but there's no hosted by a format. But my smaller events that I run, my summits, my conferences, all have a facilitated meetings program. So I'm probably 80-20% the other way. So quite a different perspective on it.
Lovely stuff. Now, when we come to facilitated meetings, Abi, I'd like to tell us just a bit about what they are. What's the kind of standard definition? What do you see in the market? Because all these names, you know, organizer arranged meetings, pre-scheduled meetings, they all mean the same thing. We've even got clients who brand their meeting program in a certain way. So I found the Meet program, one client, another client calls it the Match program, another client calls it Must Meet, which is essential. They just branded their whole facilitated meeting program as Must Meet. Can you tell us a bit about what it is and why do organizers do it?
So I think it stems originally from the traditional hosted buyer model. So a hosted buyer model is where an organizer will essentially sponsor some high level attendees to come and meet with the suppliers at their event. So for example, I used to work on IBTM, which was previously EIBTM, and it's my understanding, and that this is a fun fact, that Ray Bloom, who founded what was EIBTM originally, has now gone over to IMEX, of course, that he came up with the whole concept of this hosted buyer program where you know, buyers would be almost paid to have their accommodation and their expenses paid to attend the event and meet with these suppliers. And these buyers are usually very, very high level. So they tend to be, you know, either with the biggest budgets or the highest buying power, let's say, in their industry, and they're the people that the suppliers really, really want to meet. So obviously this has evolved, you know, not all organizers have the budgets to host all of their buyers in the same way. So what we're seeing now is this evolution where the structure is the same. So the buyers will be in attendance and have a certain set number of meetings throughout their journey at their event, whether that's 1 day, 2 day, just a couple of hours, but they're obliged to meet with these suppliers in this pre-scheduled fashion. So they've got pre-scheduled appointments in their diaries, and the suppliers look forward to those because these tend to be the best of the best buyers at that event. I hope that explained it.
Makes complete sense, and thank you for that, Jack. And tell me, and Greg, I suppose Jack first, from your point of view, what are the business benefits? What are the buyers and suppliers who are taking part in these facilitated meeting programs? What do they get out of it? What's the benefit to them?
So yeah, I'll go first. I think for us, with our larger scale events like Confex, it's more of a traditional trade show, but where we've used it and it's been really successful for our sponsors is the more niche events where it's much more targeted in terms of the organizers that are coming and the content that we're running. So our smaller events like our technology summit, our agency leaders summit, where it's quite a focus, the audience is much more targeted. It's sort of that different level that Abi just described, where it's the more higher tier, and we run smaller events just for them. And so if you're selling sponsorship into that kind of event, they want to make sure that they're definitely getting their ROI from it. So for us, it's important to have that facilitated meeting process so that we can ensure that the right people are meeting the right sponsors and everyone's getting the right return out of it. For our bigger scale events where it's much more of a free-flowing trade show, we don't run it. But I think for those much more targeted events where the sponsors are paying a higher premium for the event, but they know that they're getting that ROI out of it in return, that's where we find it is really successful. And that's where we put it into place pretty much across all of our summits now. We have a must meet or facilitated meeting or pre-arranged meeting. I think we call it pre-arranged meetings in ours, but that's when we use it and it does work successfully.
Great, thank you. And yeah, it seems to me what you're saying, it's almost like you're, you know, an old school matchmaking data where you're bringing the right sites together to kind of connect and get some value out of the show. And I think we've got a case study later on which we can kind of show the audience from when you did your global event tech summit. I think there were like 10 deals done off the back of that particular show. So it shows that bringing the right people together at the right time in the right environment can make magical things happen. And talking about magical things, Greg, tell us about what happens at your events and how that works, because they're pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk a little bit about why our format's different, but I think just to add on to Jack's point, I think facilitated meetings, we call them pre-scheduled meetings, are not for everyone. You need to make sure that you've got the right people in the room and the exchange value between the buyer and supplier is sufficient to justify that work and time. So you need a relatively narrow scope of product. What we like about it and what our suppliers and buyers like about it is it removes the guesswork. So we do a huge amount of work pre-event to ensure that we maximize their time and the suppliers know they're getting a full diary with the right buyers of their products. So this increases satisfaction. It makes it much easier to track ROI, and it makes it much easier for us to rebook them the following year because we're leaving less to chance. Another nice thing about the sort of pre-scheduled one-to-one meetings is that you can be quite dynamic with how you format the program. So if you're thinking about what a meeting is, it's really an exchange, and it could be an exchange of ideas. It could be building rapport. It could be decision-making a decision-making platform, but it doesn't need to be a conventional meeting. It could take place, you could choose who sits next to who during dinner. If you have a transfer on a bus, you can choose who sits next to each other on the bus. So it gives you quite a lot of flexibility to create quite a creative program.
Yeah, flexibility is, I think, key with all this, isn't it? Because there's a lot of orchestration that goes on in the background to make sure, like you say, the right people have to be in the room at the right time. So if you've got, lower quality delegates, you're never going to create the value at the end if the right people aren't in the room. So getting them in the room is critical. But then, what do you do once they're in the room? That's a big question, because I know, Jack, I've seen you work the room for these sorts of things, and how do you make sure those meetings actually happen right from the beginning, from like the technology, but right to the end when you're actually on the show floor?
Was that to me? Sorry.
Sorry, yes, I was a bit quick when I said Jack. Yeah.
Sorry, repeat it again. My internet cut out slightly.
Yeah, not a problem. So, we talk about getting the right people in the room, but say you have got all the right people in the room, which you guys definitely do at your events, because I've seen them in action. There's an element of making sure those meetings happen, from the technology to make sure the schedule is created, but also then to physically being in the room, making sure the right people actually have the right meetings. So can you tell me a bit about that user journey, about how you make sure those schedules are created, and then how that flows through to actually making sure humans meet with other humans? Because often it's a bit like herding cats, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the key thing is to get all of the tech right before. So we used to do it really manually, which was an absolute nightmare. Before we adopted an app a couple of years ago for one of our events, and it didn't quite work. And so like a week before, we decided to not use it and just go old school Excel sheets, which as you can imagine, was a ridiculous amount of manpower needed to be involved. Now we use Grip, obviously it works seamlessly, it works really well. And so having all of that prep beforehand is key. You need to have all of that, because therefore, when you get on site, like you said, Hugh, all you need is the manpower there to just get people into that room. So I've seen some people do it in a way where they like take pictures of people on entry so that they know who everyone is, and then go and find them. We don't go as far as that, but what we have in our meeting room, in our pre-scheduled meeting room, obviously Grip will then notify people your meeting's coming up. It will give them the schedule. It will give them push notifications when they have meetings, things like that. So most of the people, probably 80% of people, will be there on time and they'll be in the room, which helps. But for that 20%, you're still going to need your team to be wrangling people into the room. So I'll have normally 2 people on a help desk that are there to guide people if they're not sure where to go for their meeting. And then we'll have normally like 2 or 3 people that are walking around the events, finding the right people and taking them into the meeting. And you have to be a little bit brutal. What I normally do as well is at the start of my event, when I get on stage, is I'll announce to people, because the way ours work is it's free to attend for the organisers that are attending. It's a free event for them. The event is supported by the sponsors. So for that to be the case, for us to be paying for you to be here, to get all of this content for free, to have all your food paid for free, and to have your overnight stay paid for free, in exchange for that is you meet with our sponsors who have made this event possible, because it's not just there to help us. These are people that will potentially help your business. They are solutions for you. And I think once you sort of set the scene like that from the top level, people get it, because they're like, yeah, these are people that I could work with in the future. So it sort of eases that tension. It makes the meetings flow a little bit more seamlessly, but you still do need that manpower of people running around on site just trying to grab people. But that can be really eliminated and down to that sort of last 10-20% if you've got everything right beforehand with the matchmaking and things like that.
Oh, yeah, Abi, please.
I was just going to jump in. I mean, before that, of course, is this qualification of who's in the room. And I think speaking to what Greg was saying, that the programs really only work if there is a genuine interest between the buyer and the supplier, let's say. And so, obviously at Grip we use a kind of preference-based system. And in previous roles that I've been in, we've used this preference-based system where both sides make preferences on whom they would like to meet. And then the diaries are pre-scheduled as a consequence. And the good thing about having the value on both sides, rather than, you know, the suppliers pushing to see these certain buyers, is that, you know, if the buyers are aware of the, you know, the value to them as well, they're coming with an idea in mind of what they want to get out of it, then that makes show up rates that much better. But qualifying, you know, the audience on both sides, you know, not just selling to every sponsor you can possibly get into your meeting program and inviting every buyer that you possibly can to get the numbers up, you know, really thinking about how you curate this program of who is meeting with whom and what they're going to get out of it. Like, that's what's going to make the meeting program a success. So I think from the very point of registration, where you're asking leading questions on who are you expecting to meet and what makes a good event for you, is even before you get to the, you know, to the actual, now you've created your diaries of appointments. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I think what helps with us as well is that there's like a certain criteria. I'm sure, Greg, it's probably the same with your events. There's a certain criteria to become a delegate. So they have to have that, like, yes, exactly what Abi said. When they're filling out their registration, they have to tick certain boxes to be qualified as an approved delegate. So I think, yeah, that helps put into the final the right people. So yeah, I back up that point. Greg, I'm sure it's probably the same with your events too.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. And I think it's not underestimating how your paid suppliers are also ambassadors. So to actually ask them who they want to meet and who they want to have in the room and work closely with them, because that can also help with a lot of the guesswork. I think like we carry a similar pressure to Jack, maybe more so because we only offer around 20 pre-arranged meetings and we charge in excess of £6,000. So the cost per meeting is really high. Our meetings are 30 minutes long. And there is no substitute to hard work. We've discussed this in the past on other panels, but it's like maybe even having the headshots for the delegates so that your team are familiar with who's who and can track them down, the mobile numbers. And what helps with Grip, shameless plug, we can send notifications through Grip to say, where are you? Buzz them when their meetings are ready to go. And also collecting instant feedback during the meeting. Which allows our delegates to mark no-shows or mark the quality of their meetings. And to Jack's point, when he's kind of quite brutal with people at the beginning of the event about the fact that there's a huge amount of investment, there are repercussions for abusing the system, and that is that you're not coming back. You know, and we offer a huge global platform, and to not be invited back is probably an inconvenience. So having that sort of tech stack behind us means it's very easy to monitor that and make sure we follow through with either positive or negative action based on behavior on site.
And then you mentioned a few interesting things, Greg, there that I'd like to pick up on. Length of meetings. So you talked about 30 minutes. Jack, how long are your meetings that you have?
So ours are really short. Ours are sort of roughly 10 minutes, normally spill over, so 10 to 12 minutes. So the pulling people to meetings process, I'm guessing, is even probably more frantic than Greg would have on site, because there's more time to play with his. But for us, we try and deliver quite a lot of meetings within the schedule for our sponsors, and we're also conscious of the delegates and not wanting them to be sitting through half-an-hour meetings. But since me and Greg had this prep call with UT the other day, I quite like the format of his, and I think that's definitely something that I want to now adopt. But for certain events, I think having that longer meeting, but a smaller number of them, I think can be really valuable. So yeah, ours are shorter, but I definitely see the value in having it the other way around as well.
And what I think is really interesting is you don't, even though they're shorter, you don't call them speed networking. And I don't know, Abi, if that's something you're seeing in terms of other lengths of meetings from amongst your other clients and other people in the industry, and whether people are moving away from speed networking as a term.
I'm not seeing speed networking come up really at all. You know, it tends to be sort of this pre-scheduled meeting, facilitated meetings, you know, verbiage. But I think that the smallest in-person meetings that I'm seeing are Jack's. But because we attenders, suppliers to Jack's, what we've found is that actually those short meetings work well for a sort of conversation starter. There is never enough time to talk about what you know, the whole conversation, but it's an opener to then during those networking breaks and things like that, that you go and find them afterwards. There's conversations that continue well after the event. And so I can see the benefit to both sides, that longer meeting where you can deep dive into exactly your needs and objectives versus we're here to introduce you to the right people and begin your customer relationship, let's say. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. There are other players in the market in our space. We're in tourism, but one of our biggest portfolios connections is luxury tourism, and there's other players for speed networking. I just tend to call that lead generation, and are you at the lead generation stage, or do you feel like the match is sufficient enough that you can actually get a little bit further down the funnel during that meeting and be that much closer to closing business, if not closing it on site? And that's kind of where we're trying to position ourselves. But I'm not going to lie and say that despite getting the right people in the room and having 30-minute meetings, I do get feedback about, we wish we had more meetings. And you have to think that as a delegate paying to be there, they are accountable normally to a board or to a manager, and they do need to justify that spend. And sometimes volume of meetings, regardless of quality, does come up. So there's maybe a hybrid model. We've thought about having like power hours in the morning of speed networking before branching out into the longer. The last thing I'll just mention on that is there's also a reason why our meetings are slightly longer, and that's just because we actually run experiences during the meeting. So our delegates meet at a meeting table, can actually then choose from a menu of experiences that they can do with one another. So it can be culinary, cultural, arts and crafts, sport, all these different things. And the idea of those are that they speed up the relationship building process, and post-event, you've got like a reference point and a memory with that individual. And for us in the tourism sector, that works really well. It's very effective, and it's not a nice to have. It's not an activity. It's proven to actually improve the business between the delegates. So that also requires a slightly longer meeting, as you'd imagine.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I heard Miguel Neves talk recently about sweat working and how you can kind of do facilitated meetings while doing a 5K run, for example. We're seeing that a lot now. What about you, Greg? Can you just tell me a bit about those experiences? Because I think that's really cool, some of the things you do with your participants.
Yeah, like some examples. I mean, we obviously do things like you could do like a cocktail mixology session, which lasts, say, 10-15 minutes out of your half an hour meeting. We sometimes have like e-bikes, or you could do, it depends which country we're in, but it would be something pertinent to that destination. If it's arts and crafts, we've even had sumo wrestling lessons, which is like a little bit more towards the extreme end. And like it's constantly refining it, because sometimes you can get carried away, but you have to remember that this is about the two individuals meeting. So maybe the mistake I made in 2015, where I sent delegates to Ferrari World and go-karting, wasn't the best idea, because you can't really talk business in a go-kart. So it's constantly refining and making sure that you're remembering why we're all there and what the delegates are paying for, and just putting that front and center.
Sorry, can I just add, Lou? Yeah, and I think on the refining point, I think that's brilliant, because even since we spoke the other day, and you just mentioned it, Greg, about how you're looking at now maybe a hybrid model with the two. It's exactly what I was thinking. Since we spoke the other day, I'm trying to look at how I can do my summits where I have like the morning of shorter, quicker paced meetings, and then longer paced meetings in the afternoon. So I think this is why opportunities like this are so great, right? Because you can just mold and adapt your own models based off of how other people are doing it successfully, which I think is great. So yeah, I was thinking
that's it.
We're inventing new event formats live on the November Grit webinar. I love it. Right, I've got to hold my hands up here and say that when I originally came up with a concept for this webinar, I called it Hosted Buyer. And I had to change the name of the webinar because our registrations just stopped at a certain level. And as soon as I got rid of Hosted Buyer and turned it into facilitated meetings, our registration shot up. So that's really interesting. And I think we talked on our prep call, didn't we, about not using the phrase hosted buyer because it can put some people off. And I'd just love to maybe talk to you, Abi, about how are people not hosting these days? So what's happening with just facilitated meetings where, forget the hosted buyer bit, what does that mean for an organizer just to do facilitated meetings? How does that differ from hosted by? Because I think that can be a bit confusing to some people, and maybe off-putting, because they think, oh, this is going to cost me a fortune if I have to send everyone to Ferrari World, do some networking.
We're seeing a lot of where, for example, Money 2020 being one of the latest ones that has added a whole pre-scheduled facilitated meeting program onto their very, very successful ecosystem event. And the idea is that it's just that bit of extra push towards these very targeted conversations. There is no hosting because the people are potentially at these events already. It's just that they have a very clear objective in mind. They know what they're looking for. You've qualified them down to that you've got the right suppliers to meet their needs. And then these are tag-ons to the normal event. So it's giving the attendees an extra incentive to come along. I think trade shows as a model have historically been kind of turn up and hope that you meet the right people and so on. And even, whether what we're talking about with pre-scheduled facilitated meetings or just being able to organize your calendar in advance so that you're talking to the right people is where the industry is heading at the moment. And these are, as you say, a lot of the queries that we're getting right now is how can we make our events more juicy, give everybody more opportunities from what we already have. And that's where the meeting programs are tagged on.
Yeah, I think definitely giving people more juice is the future. And to what everyone was saying earlier is, if you're an event organizer and you've got quality people inside your community, why wouldn't you just be more intentional about connecting people through meetings? So it makes so much sense. And I think, Jack, you said that you just intentionally don't use the phrase hosted by because it can put some people off.
Yeah, I think there's a strange stigma around the word because, like I said, we don't use it for context, but we do have now a use script for pre-scheduling meetings. So the only difference is we don't incentivize people to have meetings like other shows do. But obviously that does work successfully for some shows. For Convex, just because of what the show is, and I think a lot of our visitor base are looking for suppliers. A lot of our exhibitors are suppliers. I think hosted by for a lot of people seems to be more beneficial for venues and destinations. For us, we found with suppliers, they want that more free flowing. They want to show products. They want it to be a bit more. Summits, conferences.
Oh, no, you're back.
Am I here? Back?
Yeah.
For our conferences, it is hosted. People are put up overnight. Their food's paid for. It's a free event for them with the content in that format. So yeah, but we don't ever call it hosted by. It's an event for them. There's pre-scheduled meetings. We'd stay away from that term. But weirdly, just because of the stigma there seems to be around it in the industry, and not because we have any adversity to the word. I don't know. It's a strange one. But Greg, what do you call yours? Oh, Abi, you've got a question.
I was just going to ask. So when you say stigma, like, what do you think is the attitude towards them then? Sorry, Hugh, doing your questioning for you, but I'm genuinely curious. Yeah.
The feedback we seem to get is that people are there just for the free hotel room or the nice things and the cocktail making. We don't find that with our summits. We don't think people are there for that. And I think having that pre-qualification helps, definitely, because then you know that they're not the type of people that would go for that type of thing. So for our summits, we don't get the implication that people are there to get a free hotel room. They're there because they want to engage with the content and they want to meet new suppliers. That's fine. On a larger scale show like Convex, I think it can be harder to work that out. And I think that's why we haven't pushed for that. So I think that's the stigma, is like people are just there. They want to go to the show, but they want their free hotel room. I spoke to someone who went to a hosted buyer event recently as a hosted buyer, and he was there to pitch to people. So I won't say what the show was, but I think it can be when you're dealing with such a big scale, it can be more difficult. So I think you need to have such a big hosted buyer team in place to be able to deal with it, which we don't have here. So for us on the smaller events, we can manage that. We know we're getting the right people in the room and it's not going to be like that. But for Convex, we'd rather it be more free flowing than that.
Great. You used shrimp eaters, didn't you? Which I thought was fantastic.
Shrimp eaters was something an American said to me. That's someone that comes and just eats the shrimp off the buffet. I think in England we'd say like, oh, no such thing as a free lunch, kind of more that kind of vibe. But I mean, our events are ripe for abuse if you think about it. I mean, we only use 5-star hotels, we cater in Michelin star restaurants, we have all these experiences. I mean, I'd love to go there just as like a freeloader, it'd be great. But we have to put a lot in place to make sure the right people are there, and that's what we're paid for. Like ultimately, the buyers that we recruit are our value. Everything else is just dressing. So we just put them through a hard qualification process. And if I use our luxury travel event as an example, we've got a portfolio of those. We'd be asking for itineraries, examples of spend. We'll get reference from supplier members of ours to make sure they're the real deal and they are doing the transactions they say they are. And then as a final sort of, after all of the qualification process, we'll actually have them pay for their own travel to the event. So that might be a flight from London to Tokyo, for example. And when they arrive, everything's taken care of. They'll be picked up from the airport, they'll be hosted, etc. But we just see that a little bit of money on the table just reconfirms that they're going there for the right reasons. So that's just kind of our final qualification factor. It works well for us.
Great. And Greg, I'd like to come back to you actually to talk. I think we mentioned it earlier about logistics in the room. I'd love to get your kind of take on how you do it. But while you're thinking of that, I'm just going to share a screen. And this screen is basically saying a message from our sponsor, and the message is from the sponsor Grip. Hello. First thing is there's a case study. Amazing. So this is Jack's case study, all about facilitated meetings. So scan the QR code and get on there and have a look. It's also on the Grip website. And then the next sponsored message is us again. Hello. We've got our next webinar. Sorry, it's December 18th. It's Trends and Predictions, all about the future of events in 2025. So do check that one out. Right. Coming back to Greg. Greg, tell us about logistics in the room. How do you kind of work the room? How do you make sure the meetings are happening? What are your tips and tools that you should give people on the webinar?
If I'm honest, it's actually quite simple in principle, because you know exactly what you're dealing with. You've got a schedule of meetings that are going to start at a certain point, and for that 5 minutes from the start time to 5 minutes into the meeting, all hands on deck. The marketing team, the operations team, the sales team, the buyer team, we take a section each. So we simply a tabletop, but we'll take like numbers 1 to 20, someone will take 90 to 120 or whatever. And they're just custodians. And what we've found out is that regardless of if you get a no-show or not, or a late buyer to a supplier's table, physically being there, checking in and making sure that individual's okay, and say that you're aware that their meeting partner hasn't turned up, squashes 99% of any issues that you're gonna have, because it's just that attention to detail and feel like they're not lost. In the worst case that the buyer doesn't arrive, we'll either find a replacement because we have a buyer overflow. And I think I'd really recommend that, just to have a few more buyers than you need. In the worst case that we can't run with that, then we'll make email introductions live at the event and facilitate an introduction virtually or post-event. So we really do everything we possibly can to that end. I think the thing with Grip, which helps versus what we used to do, harking back to like 2016, I remember being on InDesign, manually creating the agendas that we then printed a few days before the event, and then you get a no-show and everyone's referring to their agenda and that person doesn't exist. It's easy now because we've got an app, and if someone's ill, you just switch them out for somebody else and the correct meeting will show in the agenda. So that has made life so much easier. Everyone knows what they're dealing with. Just need to make sure you've got good Wi-Fi in your event hall.
Yeah, it's all about the Wi-Fi. I've seen that. That's an answer to a lot of these webinars. Abi was first. Go on, Abi.
I was just gonna add that as well as it being all hands on deck while those meetings are taking place, making sure that everybody's in the right place at the right time. One thing that I've noticed with people who do good meeting programs is that there's all manner of refreshments in the area. So there's no reason for anyone to get up and go anywhere else to go and get, top up a coffee, go and get water. It means that everything's staying to time. And both Greg and Jack, I know, do this as well, which is, refreshments in the area. Make sure it's really, really clear where everybody needs to go and when as well. Everything's very well labeled, as well as it being, having the right amount of staff on site to help make that happen.
And I heard someone mention last time about clocks as well, the importance of a clock in the room.
Yep, big old timer, counting down the minutes remaining on the meetings. I've seen that done really well as well. Digital screens that, it just counts down. It gives people an idea of where they need to be next and everything. Also digitalizing the schedule as well, so that it's very easy to find and see where they need to be next, as Greg said, either on the app but also on screens as well is helpful.
Yeah, I saw the clock in the Money 2020 meeting room. It was bigger than Big Ben. Anyway, Jack, over to you. You had some answers.
Yeah, so I was going to pretty much agree with everything Greg said. And when he was saying about doing it old school on pieces of paper, we were doing it even on Excel, and it was that same headache of like once a meeting misses, it's absolute chaos. Whereas now with Grit, literally you can switch them out, and it goes through to everyone's diary. So that has been an absolute blessing because yeah, no matter how many people you have in the room, no matter how many meetings you've pre-scheduled, there's still going to be times where someone is not going to turn up for a meeting. So yeah, we're a similar setup. We have all of our team, all hands on deck, trying to find people. But Grip has obviously made it a lot easier. We obviously have refreshments nearby. That's a key one. And I think another thing which it sounds brutal. It sounds like I'm really horrible to all my delegates. I'm really not, honestly. Like, I'm lovely when you're on site. And we don't give anyone their room key until after all of the meetings have finished on day one. So it stops people from being able to leave the room and go into their hotel room and check in. And I tell people this. I say, like, because I introduce all of my events on stage. So I say it in jest, because I think just breaking that barrier where if you just got told, oh, I can't go to my hotel room, why? You're not allowed. It's a bit like, well, this is a bit weird and scary. I don't want to be at this event. So I'll say and laugh on stage, and I'll say, look, I'm not giving you your room key until you finish your meetings today. You obviously understand why, because I want you to engage with this event. You're here, buy into the event and be part of it. And I think once you sort of break it down like that, people are like, yeah, no, you're right. I am here. I'm here to be part of the event. So that's another little trick you use, but I think you have to market and communicate that in the right way. Because if it's just a rule and they keep asking people why they can't have their room key, it can come across wrong. So if you sort of break that with a bit of humor and explain it's because we want you to be part of the event for the whole day, and then you can go check into your room after day one's finished, then I think it works quite well.
I love it, Jack. Your events sound like Squid Game, where like all the hotel room keys are inside a big glass bowl, and they like empty at a certain time, and everyone has to run and get their hotel. Anyway,
it's an item in the agenda as well, isn't it, Jack? So you kind of make it as part of the program. There is dedicated time for people to take their cases,
your room key,
fresh, and then rejoin for networking afterwards, which I think is really nice.
Yeah, we do like a room key collection, which is within the meeting room, but during the last session of the day, we clear out the tables from the room and we bring everyone's light boxes to the front. So it's like a mini exhibition. So all the sponsors get in there, they stand in front of their light box. We serve a few refreshments for everyone, some alcoholic drinks if you want, or non-alcoholic stuff. And you can come and collect your key, but it gives you a chance to re-engage with the sponsors that you spoke to earlier in your short meetings, collect your key, then go back to your room and get ready for the evening.
Reminds me a bit of if anyone forgot their PE kit at school, they made you do it in your pants. No one ever forgot their PE kit.
No one has to do their meetings in their pants.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that was the 80s. I think things are slightly different now. Hashtag me too. So I've got some questions. I'm going to go through the questions very, very quickly, rapid fire, because we've got like 6, 7, 10 minutes left. And let's try and get some awesome answers for these, which I'm sure you'll come up with. First one, for years, I've done hosted bar events with facilitated roundtables. What are some ways in which others facilitate intimate tables of 8 at scale for over 100 people? So you've got like loads and loads of people. How do you make sure they have the right meetings? This is quite interesting because we've talked about like one-to-one meetings, and I get that. So what happens when you have many-to-many? How does that work with roundtables? Who has experience of that? Go on, Jack.
Yeah, well, we do offer roundtables as well as part of the event, and we offer it at the same time that you're doing your must meet for meetings. You can subscribe to a roundtable, and it's first come first serve. So they typically run at the same time as the meeting session. So if you want to go to a roundtable, you put yourself forward. We then give the sponsor the chance to pick who they want on the roundtable, and it's sort of first come first serve, and to register, and then the sponsors will pick who they want. But it's quite a small part. The meetings are more of the emphasis for our events. So I don't know if Greg's got more experience with it.
No, I mean, like similar. I mean, well, there's two times we'll use roundtables or group meetings. 3. We lunches and dinners, we often table plan. Instead of having panels, we're kind of anti-panel discussions. I know we're on a panel right now, so like, oops. But we kind of prefer to have the participants engaged and involved in the content. So we'll get them on roundtables and they discuss a topic and then they present back in, like, let's say 30 seconds. And those people on the table will be dictated by us based on interest. And then sometimes we do like group experiences or excursions where for 2 hours we'll go do like a hike or something like that. So they're the kind of group settings. And there's one thing I wanted to touch on with that is like I am fundamentally anti-clique. I go to so many events when you're earlier in my career and it's just people who know each other, like just hanging out, and it's just like, what is the point in being, I mean, it's great to catch up with old friends, but people need to meet new people and be introduced, and a lot of people are more introverted than you'd expect. So we just try and create an environment which organically gives them exposure to new people, and those roundtables are just examples of how we do that. But just wanted to add that piece.
No, I love that anti-clique. That's going to be a content idea for 2025 for us. I really believe in that, because that's my pet peeve at events as well. But you just named it for me. Brilliant. Another question in. How long do you leave between meetings for people to move from one meeting to the next? That's really interesting. Who's got experience of that? Abi, how long do you think?
I think it depends on how your tables are lined up. I mean, I've been to events where the tables are adjacent to one another. There's other events where there's you're having to go from room to room to move around. Especially if it's perhaps the meetings are happening on exhibitor booths as opposed to designated tables. You need to leave a little bit longer. So I just maybe start thinking about how your event is arranged and allow people to finish up their meetings is probably a good, you need it probably at least a 1 or 2 minute sort of, wrap up set and, time for them, and then journey time to their next one and allowing for them to put their things down and settle in and start talking. So I guess it depends on your event.
I see you're nodding away there, Jack. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, so I was just writing down that anti-clique thing. I think that's absolutely brilliant. We've got to talk about that at Confex, and I think Grip should be part of that conversation. Yeah, how to get people networking, anti-clique. That was brilliant, Greg. So I'm stealing that. That's great. And
thanks, Jack.
Yeah, because it's so true. I mean, how often do you go to events and everyone's just talking to their friends? Sorry, I'm conscious of time. We do all of our meetings in one room, in a big room with all of the tables relatively close. So it's a very loud room. We have like a bell that we ring at the end of the meetings, and I normally will shout, or one of my team will shout, and we'll go up to people and be like, no, move on, time to move your meeting. So quite a lot of manpower in it as well. What we also try and do is we have, if someone's got a block of meetings, we'll try and make them all within the same session so that they can get around people quickly. So you might have all of your meetings in the first hour in the morning. You wouldn't have like one there, one in the afternoon session, and then one on day 2. They'd normally be in a block so that you can get round. And then during the other times, if you do have to go and do work, you can do that rather than you having to dip in and out throughout the whole 2 days of the event.
Fantastic. And then thinking about the roadmap for delivering facilitated meetings, what are the key milestones along the way? So say you have a community already and you are running events and you've got quality people who turn up to your events, but you've never done a facilitated meeting program. Greg, what should people start with, and what are the different steps in that journey to get to running really great meeting programs?
Just brief, then I'll use a case study, which would be Arabian Travel Market, which is a Reed Exhibitions event. So that's a standard expo. It's just throw enough mud at the wall, something will stick. The right people are in the room, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot of different verticals of tourism in one room. They launched with ILTM, their luxury portfolio, a taste of ILTM at ATM. And what that effectively is a small pre-scheduled meeting track within the exhibition. Now, how would they go about that, or how would I go about that? Well, firstly, you just need to understand where the value is in the bar supplier matrix. So the easiest way to do that is just the data that you collect whilst onboarding your buyer and supplier. And then just start talking to the suppliers about who the people they really want to get in front of are, and start small. Just do like a 1 day or a half day of pre-scheduled meetings that you don't charge a huge amount for. And just trial it. It's actually a pretty simple undertaking. It just is the data, and you just want to get the 2 people in the room that have the maximum opportunity of exchanging like a meaningful amount of money or information to make it worthwhile. And then you can monetize it later.
Great. We should all go off with that information and we can start our own hosted buyer meetings. Actually, you and I could do our own facilitated meeting program now, couldn't we? I don't know what mine would be, cycling probably. Right, it's more rapid fire ones. This is really interesting.
May I just add to that,
go
which
on,
is,
go on.
you know, I think that the important thing as well is assessment of how it went, you know, that kind of, so you're going to come onto it, but I really think that, you know, part of that timeline is also looking at how good were those meetings? How did people rate it? Are the buyers right? And you know exactly what Greg was saying, you know, if you to try and cut down on the shrimp eaters, you need to understand how the suppliers have rated those buyers so that they don't come again. So the timeline obviously is sort of where do you start, but also that assessment piece is so vital to how you move on.
Yeah, that was going to be my second question. You read my mind, which is, what does success look like? How do we define success? You know, because someone asked the question, what's the best way to facilitate meetings between delegates and sponsors to ensure both parties are happy? And I think that last part of that question, we've answered the rest of it, but not that last part. And you just touched on it, Abi, to ensure both parties are happy. What does happy mean? Like, how do we know that they've got value out of it? Jack, what do you do? Because obviously GRIP has, you know, surveys when you've had meetings, but what do you do? How do you sell success back to your delegates?
Really good question. I think one of the things we learned was when we were doing this format at the start was we were initially just asking the suppliers who they want to meet with, and then we've looked at asking the delegates who they want to meet with. But both parties need to be involved in that. So obviously GRIP allows us to, we ask a week before to the delegates who they want to meet with, and then we give all those options to the sponsors and they pick who they want to meet with. So that helps immediately because both sides are involved in that matchmaking process. So that's a good way of doing it. People can then rate their meetings on the app, and then we send our feedback forms afterwards, and we ask for the ROI from the sponsors, which gives us a percentage of how many thought they had. I think it's on a scale of like good, very good, excellent, which helps us do it. But I think to make sure, rather than asking people post-event, because we all know what happens when someone leaves an event, you're not going to get everyone responding to your feedback forms. It never happens. So to get it right before the event, to make sure everyone was happy, if they wanted to meet with you and you wanted to meet with them, then you're much more likely to have ROI out of that encounter from both sides. So yes, obviously still ask for the feedback afterwards, but if that's right, then you're eliminating half of the guesswork after the event anyway. And
about eliminating guesswork, how do we actually match the right people with each other? That's another few questions we've got. So Greg, obviously pre-qualification is very, very important. How do you make sure that pre-qualification flows through into an actual meeting that then results in these metrics that we're talking about?
Well, I mean, it's in the supplier and buyer's hands, as Jack said. So our job is to make sure the right people are on the platform, so the event platform. And first, you've got to define what problem you're trying to solve with the event. For example, we are running an event which increases outbound luxury travel from Europe. So if you're a hotel in America and you want more European business, you come to this event. So already the problem, you know, you've identified what problem you're trying to solve. Then you talk about, okay, well, what category of agency and what category of hotel and what average room night spend, etc. And you just deep dive into that. So then we just qualify quite simply agencies which are sending clients out of Europe based on the supply matrix and interest that we've got to their destinations, run them through the qualification process, which I've already outlined in terms of testimonials, examples of itineraries. Then it is down to the buyer and supplier. So with the system on GRIP, if it's a 50% match, it means that it's a one-sided match effectively. Anything above 50% shows mutual interest by both parties. So the higher the percentage, the more positive the meeting will be. So the good thing about this is that you know both parties are interested, but post-event, if someone says, oh, I didn't enjoy that meeting, you can say, well, hold on. They were in your top 20 to meet. So you've got the data, and it just makes the conversation post-event much cleaner. So it's kind of, yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
No, it does, definitely. It's all about the data. It's all about demonstrating the results through having that end data that
I just wanted to add one more thing on the ROI piece that Jack said. I agreed wholeheartedly with everything he says. The one other opportunity to consider is incentivizing the buyers to share their booking data. So quite often we go to the suppliers to say, well, how many bookings have you received? Well, sometimes as a supplier, you might want to keep your cards to your chest because you might think, oh, my rate's going to increase, they're going to upsell me, or I want to put hardball. But sometimes you can incentivize the buyer as well. And you can do that through giving them perks at future events, or fully hosting them when others aren't fully hosted, or you can create a tier or a certification or a reward system. So it's interesting just to look at both sides of that value chain, and where the least friction is for them to share that data with you, and how to reward it.
You can see Jack furiously stealing your ideas. So
that's a great idea.
It's great.
That's
great.
brilliant, Greg.
All the knowledge bombs coming from all of you today. Last question, very, very, very quickly. I just want one answer, one word answer, maybe a sentence answer. This has come up a couple of times. Who owns facilitated meetings? Is it ops? Is it marketing? Is it the client success? Is it client delivery? Who actually owns this? Abi, in your experience, what's the job role?
I'm sorry, I don't think I can answer it. I would say it's a whole team effort. But I would rather pass it to the others.
Great. Greg, what's in your experience? Who owns this as a thing?
Well, we have a buyer recruitment team. So we have 5 individuals who are responsible for onboarding buyers. And I would say that they are probably responsible for 70% of the success we see with the individuals that come on site and the overall experience that the suppliers have during their meetings. But as Abi said, everyone plays a role because it's operationally intensive. You get the right suppliers in the room as well, so the sales team play a big part, and then you need to market it to the buyers in the right way, so marketing do too. But Jack, how about on your side?
So it used to be me, which was before when I was launching these events, before we were using the tech, and I'm not that tech savvy, funnily enough. So it's not me anymore. I'm quite far back from it. It's my delegate team, my marketing manager, Johnny, who obviously Abi knows well. He completely owns this. He's fully embedded in it, and I think it really helps because for him, it's his sort of project to run, and it's developing him up. He's getting to know all of the buyers really well from doing this. So it's giving him a little step up in his career, which is another really great way of doing it. But ops are involved as well. Luke, and our delegate, he's our delegate acquisition manager. He's fully involved in it as well. So I think it's a marketing and ops and delegate combination. And I'm just there to talk on webinars and look fancy.
I just want to add one more thing, which is actually just always have a very clear strategy. So how are you selling it? How are you acquiring buyers? I think probably that needs to come from the top rather than the logistical teams and things like that. I think you need to have a very clear strategy about why you're adding this to your events, if you're adding it to an existing event.
Great insight, Abi and Greg and Jack. It's been amazing. Right, I'm just going to talk to you a bit about the next webinar, 18th of December, all about trends for next year. Tim's going to be on it. We've got lots of other exciting people going to be on this webinar. We've also got Enrico and we've got Devon Pasha as well. So some very insightful people, and they've got a hard act to follow. So Abi, when people want to get in contact with you, how should they hit you up? Is it on email? Is it on LinkedIn? Is it on X, formerly Twitter?
Either or, LinkedIn or my email address, abi.cannons@grip.events.
That's Abi with an I. Greg, how should people reach out to you if they want to contact you?
LinkedIn or greg@weareconnections.com.
Lovely. And Jack, if they want some knowledge bombs off you, how should they get them?
Yeah, you can have me on LinkedIn, just Jack Newey, or obviously I'm guessing a lot of people here will be in the events world, so hopefully I'll see you all at Confex, international-confex.com, which is 26th, 27th of Feb next year at Excel.
Don't worry, we will all be there. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining, and thank you, everyone, for watching. This has been very insightful, and you'll see some of the snippets from this webinar on LinkedIn, on Grip's LinkedIn. So, yeah, and you'll also be getting the recording on demand, so feel free to share it with your team. So thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you on the next webinar in December. Thank you, guys. Thanks for joining. Cheers.
Bye.